I have not managed to meet everyone yet, but I am Candice Rice. I'm an assistant professor of archaeology and classics here at Brown. And I would like to just start by saying that I have so enjoyed all of these papers. They've been stimulating and hopeful, I think, as we think about training new generations of Mediterranean archaeologists. It's my pleasure now to introduce our final discussant, Dimitri Nakassis. He is professor and chair of classics at the University of Colorado Boulder. He received his degrees from the University of Michigan and the University of Texas at Austin, and he's held positions at Trinity, Florida State, the University of Toronto. He's the author of Individuals in Society and Mycenaean Pylos in 2013, and he co-directs the Western Argolid Regional Project and the Pylos Tablets Digital Project. He's currently at work on a project that proposes a new way of understanding late Bronze Age Mycenaean Greece that begins, similar to so many of our discussions over the past 2 days, in rejecting interpretations premised on its essential unity. So please welcome Dimitri.
I'm going to go up here where I'm safe. Okay, so thank you to the organizers for inviting me. Thanks to everyone for their wonderful talks. I was given the brief to be a discussant, but obviously I didn't have the papers in advance, so I'm trying to pull together some threads from today's talks and yesterday's talks in a way that I hope pulls together some ideas that have been common to, I think, all of the papers or many of the papers. And I want to do that relatively quickly because nobody wants to hear me talk incoherently for 45 minutes. So I'm going to try to limit my comments to 10 to 15 minutes, and then hopefully we can have a broader discussion. And maybe I can preface that my comments by saying that I think it would be great if the discussion involved a lot more of the graduate students and sort of early career faculty, because I don't know. I was recently. I'm on the program committee. Maybe I'll say this. I'm on the program committee of the AIA, and apparently the AIA, the Archaeological Institute of America. Apparently, the annual meeting of the Archaeological Institute of America has themes, which I was unaware of. Strangely, given I'm on the program committee, and we were trying to think of different themes, and I was like, is it really a good idea for a bunch of tenured faculty to be deciding what the themes are? Like, maybe. I guess we're supposed to be leading the discipline forward, but actually it seems like maybe that's not the best direction or the best source of new ideas and innovations. Like, maybe we should be talking to graduate students about what they think the theme ought to be. So I think it would be great if the discussion weren't just us tenured folks. So I have, I think, 7 threads that I thought would be interesting to highlight, and many of them plug directly into what was said yesterday by Lynn and Lisa, if I can call them that. So the first is language, which has come up quite a bit, and what it means for scholarly exchange, and what it means for collaboration, and what it means for friendship, something that I think Lisa did a really great job of highlighting. And so it seems like, despite the fact that we're constantly talking about Mediterranean connectivity, we're actually dealing with a disconnected or unconnected or deconnected Mediterranean archaeology, right? Split into these not just national traditions, but also linguistic traditions that keep us apart. And the thing that I thought about in this regard from a Greek perspective, because that's pretty much entirely where I've worked, is the Journal of Greek Archaeology. Yannis will remember this. So in 2015, when the Journal of Greek Archaeology was announced, the announcement said that they would publish articles in English, in French, in German, and in Italian. Only. And then I quote directly from the announcement, work from Greek scholars is particularly welcome, but should be either translated into English or sent to us for English translation or assistance. And I know I lost my mind, and I think Yannis lost his mind, and I remember Peter Day also lost his mind. Anyway, if you read the Journal of Greek Archaeology now, you will notice that it is entirely in English, right? The solution to the problem of not publishing articles in Greek was just not to publish anything in any languages whatsoever other than English. So I think that's right, that the Journal of Greek Archaeology is entirely monolingual. So this is the current state. I mean, it seemed bizarre at the time. It seems especially bizarre now that in 2015 a journal, we have Unicode. Like, it's not like the old days where like you sent someone something in Greek and like they didn't have the font and then it just came up as a bunch of like question marks, and like random signs. Like, it's a very strange situation that we find ourselves in. And generally speaking, my experience is that if something is published in Greek, it's almost impossible to find it on this side of the Atlantic unless you're in Cincinnati, perhaps. And so I end up spending, thousands of euros buying books and having them shipped back from Greece every summer. So that one is language. Two is representation, which is something that a number of authors brought up. I co-authored with Grace Ernie and Laura Heath Stout a piece in the AJA, just the last issue of the AJA, about representation in the pages of the American Journal of Archaeology, where, unsurprisingly, we found that our discipline isn't just extremely white, it's also extremely elite, I should say. So the way we got at this is we asked, in our survey, authors to identify their sort of ethnic/racial identity, or identities, I should say, in addition to some other information, among which was highest parental education level. And it's unsurprising that a huge percentage of people who publish in the American Journal of Archaeology in the last 20 years, effectively, have parents with multiple graduate degrees. And I am one of these people, So I have one parent with 2 doctoral degrees and one parent with a master's degree. So this is who we are, something that I think hasn't been brought up as much is class, but that's something that's really I know important in a less often discussed in a North American context, more often discussed, I think, in a UK context. We often talk about first generation. Of course, first generation can mean a lot of things, right? First generation college, but also first generation grad student, I think, is equally something that seems to be important, right? If your parents have gone through grad school, you have a certain kind of ability to navigate the system in a way that you don't have if your parents haven't. And because educational attainment very closely maps onto economic class, we didn't want to ask people how much money their parents made or something like that. But in a North American context in particular, educational attainment and economic class map onto each other quite closely. So yeah. And then the question is, what do we do about this, of course? We talked a little bit about the role of journals, and I think that's really important. Remember, at one point, someone reached out to me to ask me if I would like to publish in their journal, and I thought, why are you asking me? Like, why are you asking a tenured, cisgendered white guy if he wants, you know what I mean? Like, reach out to more marginalized, younger members of the profession. It just doesn't seem to make sense to me. So the journals can play a role, I think, by through mentorship programs. I know that's something that the AJA is working on, by going to conferences and approaching younger researchers to submit things to the journal. But of course, there are major pipeline issues that crop up well before journals are in a position to do anything about anything. So that's a second issue I think I wanted to flag. The third issue I thought a little bit about because of Lynn's talk was practices. And of course, we all know to what an extent archaeological survey really transformed the discipline in so many ways, and it changed the way we think about periodization, it changed the way we think about the countryside, of course, and urbanization and ruralization. It changed our relationship to not just periodization, because of course the periods, what the hell does 323 BC mean anywhere outside of a city? But it also changed the way that we engaged with other periods, right? The way that survey archaeologists were forced to deal with periods that we were not trained to deal with. So a lot of prehistorians all of a sudden super interested in Ottoman and Venetian and so on and so forth, including me. So I'm no different there. So archaeological survey has been so transformational in the second half of the 20th century, and it got me thinking about what kinds of practices might we identify in the new century that could be equally transformational or kind of get us in that direction. And the thing that came to mind was the archaeology of the contemporary world. Seems to be a kind of animating, the ideas that are coming out of the archaeology of the contemporary world seem to be something that's super interesting and important in the present moment. Of course, in Greece, that's often linked with archaeological survey. A lot of the work on the archaeology of contemporary Greece is coming out of archaeological survey, and I'm an example of that. But there's also the importance of the contemporary ethical engagements that we now especially feel are important as our work as archaeologists flow out in a way of the work of flow out of the ethical concerns of the archaeology of the contemporary world. And I'm thinking in particular of the end of Raffi Greenberg's and Yannis Hamalakis' book, where they're talking about their projects that engage with contemporary Israel and Greece. These kinds of projects are becoming more common. And I know there are plenty of examples too in Central and Western Mediterranean, and so I was just trying to think about, to what an extent can we anticipate more theoretical developments coming out of those types of projects? Or I'm sure there's other stuff I'm missing. So practices was a third thing. Four was something that a couple of people talked about, and something that I'm very interested in too, which is struggles with basic categories. So, we've raised with a Z. We've raised certain ways of thinking to the ground, or we thought we did, but then we kind of left certain foundational ideas or in place, and then they continue to haunt our archaeological imaginations. So periodizations, that's something that came up quite a bit. That's something I'm worried about. Cultural categories, another thing that came up quite a bit, is something I'm also worried about. So that seems like something we're continually struggling with, trying to rethink or uproot these basically 19th century categories that we can continue to use unthinkingly. The fifth thing, I don't know, this is maybe just me, but it struck me that one theme was a kind of a frustration at the lack of major narrative shifts in the face of massive changes in our empirical data sets. So something that Stephen talked about, for example, something Julia talked about, something I find very frustrating in the study of the Greek Bronze Age, that the answer to every research question is the palaces, it seems like sometimes. And it's like, if the answer to every question is going to be the same, then we can just stop doing late Bronze Age archaeology, and we can start doing something else that's more interesting, where we might not know the answer to our research questions in advance. Right? And And so yeah, I think there's a need for some kind of paradigm shift which allows us to actually use all this data that we have. I just find it these kind of major narratives they're just zombies. They refuse to die, right? And you just get the same damn thing over and over and over again. So that we might as well not have been doing anything this whole time. Sometimes it feels like. Sorry, that's too depressing. Let's say something more nicer. Imagining new kinds of collaboration and authorship that are non-hierarchical and collective was the sort of sixth thing. It came up in Julia's talk, but I think it's sort of it was part of also of what Ava was talking about and some what other people talk. So decentering the kind of single-authored monograph, decentering the kind of what my friend Bill Caraher calls the heroic mode of archaeology. Blagan as like the single, right? These older from 100 years ago excavation monographs where it's all in the head of one man, almost always a man, right? And then that's just it just all comes out, and then that's it, right? So there's an interesting trend towards more dialogue in archaeological publication. So Yannis and Rafi's book, but also Archaeological Theory and Dialogue, which I was reading on the plane on the way here. So these books that are kind of a mix between conventional monograph, or either pure dialogue, or a mix between a conventional monograph, edited volume, and discussion that comes out of often a relatively small number of people who know each other well, working together in an intense environment and producing something that's radically different, not just in form but also in content. It seems to me like we need to have more different types of publications of this kind in order to overcome some of the issues that have been identified with this kind of fragmentation of Mediterranean archaeology, and I need to put it back together again. And obviously there's the growth in data and expertise is so astronomical that we need our friends to not so we don't say anything terribly stupid, but also just to produce new and different kinds of knowledges. And then the last thing, which is maybe the most the most problematic and the most frustrating and the most potentially damaging to one's mental health are the roles of institutions. Yesterday we heard a lot about big digs from Lisa and big institutions in our private conversation I had with Lisa, and the way that these big digs and big institutions remain incredibly top-down, remain incredibly hierarchical, remain text-based, remain urban-based, and remain islands in a negative sense. I shouldn't say that, right? In a conference on Mediterranean archaeology, remain prisons, right? Intellectual prisons in which their ideas don't get out and don't come in. And of course, all of these institutions are the product of colonial dynamics. They continue to operate as such. I think we can all agree. As Yannis pointed out in his book, they're often the most conservative institution in all of Mediterranean archaeology, often under the guise of being apolitical, right? So they often they refuse to interfere in the internal politics of the nations in which they are located, and I suppose they've got very good reasons for doing so. But it also allows them, for example, to operate during a military dictatorship, let's say, in Greece, for example. There's these institutions that we control to a certain extent, or at least potentially have the ability to control, but also things like archaeological laws, which is something that Yannis and Rafi talk about in their book as institutions that require change, right? That lag behind the times, and are often the product of colonial dynamics themselves too, right? Or crypto-colonial dynamics. And I guess the thing that I kept thinking about is the sort of big question that I had. This is my own reflects my own personal obsession, I guess, and it's a real question: is to what extent do we think about making small changes from the inside, little tweaks, kind of it's getting better all the time sort of way of thinking about things, and things are getting better all the time, as Lynn's talk reminded us, or do we need to burn it all down and just kind of start all over again? And I go back and forth between those two things of engaging and trying to make changes on the inside and then getting incredibly frustrated and just wanting to burn everything down. So depending on when you ask me this question, I'll give you a different answer. But I do think that the reason I kept thinking about institutions is because of the need for us not to just be talking at conferences, but try to do things. And of course, there's lots of institutions that I've mentioned, like journals, our own universities, our own programs. And I just, I don't know what to do about these institutions. It seems like we're reaching a breaking point where they're just simply not working. Maybe Jim can do things at College of Charleston that seem like impossible at higher scales. I don't know. But that was the sort of last thing that struck me was institutionally, like what kinds of actions are possible that we can, where we can allow these other things that we're all interested in to blossom. Okay, how long did I talk? That was about 15 minutes. Yeah, okay, good. Does anyone want to respond to anything I said? Thanks. Is this one? Okay.
They didn't yell at you.
No.
All right. So we have about 15 minutes left of the formal schedule. And so we're going to have about 10 minutes of questions, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Peter and Tyler. And I see a hand up. I'm going to pause on that for one moment, and I'm going to use this opportunity to ask our graduate students what you think. Yeah, I know. He prepped you for this. And I know you all have thoughts. Liza.
Great. Thank you so much for your remarks. Yes, I have many thoughts and positive ones. I just want to note that all of the threads that you brought up are indeed interconnected and so can be so problematic to try and extricate. And particularly I'm thinking of the intersections of language that you brought up, representation and institutions, and the inequities that language training often involves for when we think about training graduate students and accepting them into graduate school. As I'm sure we all know, I think I'm preaching to the choir here, that students who oftentimes go to elite high schools get training in the classical languages. Then they're piped into these classical undergraduate programs and then piped right into classical graduate programs. And that's a huge equity issue. So I'm very heartened to hear that I'm not alone in seeing this issue. And I think the question then becomes what can we do about it? As a graduate student, I'm obviously powerless in this situation. So thank you for using your voice to speak about this.
Yeah, I can just say really quickly that it's not just a problem of ancient languages. Modern language instruction is down across at least North America. I looked at the MLA data. It is frightening. Of the institutions that responded to MLA, only French and Spanish are taught in a majority of institutions. And then there's a big drop off, and it's basically like, Chinese, Arabic, and then Greek and Latin are actually doing relatively well considering that, nobody really speaks them anymore. So it's language instruction as a whole is really a problem outside of the most elite universities, and even at R1 universities, there's big problems in terms of language instruction.
Just a question on that, Dimitri. Is that the 18 data, or did they come out just with new data?
I think it's the 18 data, but I wouldn't
Okay.
bet my life on it.
All right. I got excited there for a minute.
I don't think this is on. All right, doesn't matter. So thank you for your remarks. Also, obviously, I agree with everything that Liza said. I'm gonna, I guess, maybe start by saying something that is probably not great, which is that I'm thinking about the utility of defining ourselves as Mediterranean archaeologists. So I work on the Eastern Mediterranean, and for instance, it's very obvious to me the amount of space that the Central Mediterranean at specific times and specific places take up in the study of Mediterranean archaeology in general. And even considering ourselves as Mediterraneanists, which is by very nature, we are all connected by this one sea, which was only a connector throughout specific times in history, right? So in our very definition of who we are as a group of scholars, are we able to maybe recognize that we're not even as diverse of region and diverse in time period? And like, is classical archaeology essentially just Mediterranean archaeology? Or are we, like, how are we really making sure that we're being inclusive of the sea, or actually really representing what it is that binds us together? Or is it not something that binds us together? I don't know if that was eloquent.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I don't have an answer to the question. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like Peter should answer that question or something. I don't know. I don't know. I've worked in a very small part of the Mediterranean, and so I don't feel like, I would have a hard time claiming that I could represent it in any kind of way. But yeah, I mean, units like this one can try to do that, right? Yeah, that seems like an improvement overall on, thinking about Lynn's experience. Yeah, it seems like a massive improvement. So I felt a lot better about where we were after her talk. But yeah, that doesn't mean, of course, that there's not a lot more work to do. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much.
I think we can dispense with the microphones because I think they're connected to the system.
Yeah.
Let's go to the recording.
Okay. Candace, are you going to call in people?
All right.
Sorry,
I'm gonna call. I think we have time for one more. Graduates question, and then.
I was just gonna say in response to Rachel, because I think it's a good question, and like as someone who works in Egypt, but is temporally not often part of like a lot of what we talk about either. I think that to me, like for example, like our coursework being Mediterranean here, right, or like being in contact with people who are digging in a similar part of the world at the same time as you, right, and being like in the year and being able to go has been really helpful for me to make me study like broader temporally in places I already am, but also be able to see connections that I haven't found otherwise, or see how things like have been, or see when it's been projected that there's a connection and there's not, if that makes sense. So I felt that at least as compared to like my undergrad experience, which was very like, we can kind of like doing material culture from a classics department, that defining ourselves, maybe not permanently, but like right now as Mediterranean as a way of training has been, I think, useful actually for getting to know like the place, like the specific region that I study a little bit better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I'm not, sorry. I hope that it wasn't me saying this is all silly.
I know,
we shouldn't be meeting. I'm just thinking about that it feels like an uneven, it feels like a very one-way,
Yeah, I don't
a one-way
disagree with that.
street, and that we all obviously there's more commonalities, I would say, than differences amongst us with our work, but it just, you know, even with what Tyler presented the first day about the AI, the breakdown of the talks, that it was the Mediterranean was super high, but when you break it down into Mediterranean, it's just Greece and Italy. Yeah. And so, you know, it's just really making sure that we're making a conscious effort, like if we're defining ourselves broadly, that we are actually broad, and acknowledging where there is maybe difference that requires its own, maybe like ontology, basically, you know, like it's its own.
It's a good point, and it's something that I think a lot about as somebody who works on the Roman world, right? Because it as a world expands far beyond just the Mediterranean, and we do need to be mindful of the similarities that brought us all together. And we have in the past day, I think, spoken far beyond the bounds of classical archaeology as traditionally defined. And you know, from the training that I received as a graduate student, where I came in, one of the first places I learned about was North Africa. It was an absolutely integral part of this world, and we need to, you know, I had the great privilege of working with Lisa in representation of women running projects and digging in North Africa and speaking all the languages and immersing yourself, and we get so much out of it, right? And we need to keep thinking in those terms. This could go on forever, and we cannot let it. And I intentionally passed over your question, and I want to give you the chance to ask that now, and then I will turn this back over to.
Okay, thanks. I just want to address the last point you made and argue against burning it down and starting over. When we started, to make a bad pun, from ground zero years ago, we made a lot of mistakes, and it's hard to reverse them. So I think incremental change is the order of the day, but at a highly accelerated rate from what we've seen over the past. My experience with the American School of Classical Studies stretches back 60 years, when the door was locked and it took an act of Congress for a Greek national to get into the library. I've seen over 60 years enormous changes, not only at the school but in collaboration and so forth. So just one voice in favor of incremental change, but faster than the past.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I could just say, you know, one thing that I found, you know, the American school is in an interesting position because it controls access to archaeological permits in Greece. And that means that it can put certain stipulations on who gets a permit. And, you know, maybe we don't want to be giving permits to people who are well known for hitting on and sleeping with undergraduate students, for example. You know, and you know, I just the lack of movement on that kind of thing just kind of makes me crazy. So yeah, I don't disagree. I just things like that make you see red, and one should not make decisions when one is seeing red. I agree with you there, but it is maddening. I know I'm just preaching to the choir. Sorry.
Would you like to make one more quick comment?
I'm a 70-year-old guy who chairs a classics department, but one of the things that we did in the undergraduate program, we'll start this year, is we will no longer have a major that's classics. It'll be called the ancient world. And we're including China, India, Persia, West Africa, in addition to the Mediterranean. We're also sort of saying you can do Greek and Latin if you want, but you can also do other languages. You can do other spaces, you can do other archaeologies. And part of this was that because people did want to look at the world before modernity from many different perspectives. And I think one of the things is that we recognize that the ancient world is a space and a time that warrants broader attention and integration. And I think part of the issue is that it can be done. Next year, we're going to think about it with the graduate, our master's program. it's time to say that there are other antiquities that we're part of. And this notion that we are simply the we don't even think of it as the Greco-Roman world, and even in the West, it's the idea, why do we use it in the terms Greco-Roman world? It's an ancient world, and it's diverse. We're multidisciplinary in a vast sense, in a sense, and I think that part of the thing is that this is the one way we are going to get other people, younger people, people that have an interest in it, that don't come at it from highly specialized backgrounds or particular predilections. I grew up in a certain place, my parents had a certain degree, et cetera. And I think that it's important to recognize that we can do this. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people are afraid to do it, but I think it can be done.
And I'm actually going to let this end with one of our Mediterranean graduate students, in all senses of the word.
Yeah, so I wanted to raise this point because I am a Mediterranean archaeologist. I am from Spain, and I also work in Cyprus. So I am in a very double sense of the word. And I've been having this conversation with Mina, who is also a grad student here, who is from Greece, and Yilmaz, who is from Turkey. And we've been having this conversation about what Mediterranean archaeology is to us and how we keep being puzzled and, interested in this debate from an Anglophone point of view, where the debate keeps being around whether Mediterranean archaeology is classics or not, or classics adjacent, or classics surrounding, and Greco-Roman in any shape or form. And that's a very legitimate concern, but for those of us who have been born and raised and studied and only came to Anglophone spheres after graduating and after post-graduation studies, we have been living and learning about so many other Mediterraneans chronologically, geographically, culturally, disciplinarily as well. We've been raising dolmens together with mosaics and Islamic fortresses, and there's just so much Mediterranean archaeology that never comes into discussion and that we have been so intimately familiarized with from our points of view, that I think has to make it somehow into these discussions, even if it's over refreshments outside.
It should not remain over refreshments outside. Thank you very much, Anna. Everyone. Peter, would you like me to wrap this up? Would you? Not me, but shall I hand this over? We could keep going. Perhaps we can keep going a little bit more informally.
That's first.
Yes.
Okay, then.
No, it's because it's not.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, okay. Well, I'll just speak loud, yeah. Good, thank you. Thank you all. Okay, I'll keep it. Thank you all. This was great. First of all, I want to, Anna, that was a great way of wrapping things up. So thank you very much. I want to thank you for that. And also sort of the various, some of the final points. I'm just going to take this 1 minute to respond, or no, not to respond, to something which I think is important. There was earlier in the discussion, I think one of our grad students said, "Oh, I'm only a grad student." And I think that's actually, you should not feel like that. Has been emphasized here very much. The grad students are the future of where this is going to go, and so you are sort of left and center. That's precisely what Dimitri was saying as well. And then just as heartening in a way, if I've counted correctly, there are 6 chairs in this room. I mean, not chairs for sitting on, but departmental chairs in this room. And so if you talk about where things are changing, and sort of in a way, as Bruce sort of was demonstrating with his brief response, but I think it is, yes, so these are, or sitting on certain committees, which can be boring, but if everybody is being engaged with here, is being said, oh, we're preaching to the choir here, but if this choir includes
a large or sizable graduate population and a number of faculty and chairs, that I think that's all the sort of ingredients that precisely can make a difference in the longer run. So, and that's already too much about more than just wrapping up. So because of all this, I think I'm really, and I think I speak on behalf of my colleagues and certainly our committee, and so it's been great to see all these discussions. The topic had sort of in a vague way been coming up earlier during the pandemic years. We thought, we need to start thinking when the pandemic's done and we can have a conference again. We should be ready. And so it was great when we then had the opportunity. We thought, okay, we're going to have it this academic year. And so again, as I said, thank you very much for everybody who took the trouble to travel here and to participate in a day and an afternoon of discussion. And see, Saturday afternoon, 5 o'clock, and we're still here despite the good weather that we've been having these days. That's really very heartening. So thank you very much.
Sure, and just a last word from me. We titled this conference as the Archaeologies of the Mediterranean, and I think that the plurality of our fields has really been made very clear over the last day and a half. And I think that that's a great thing. And I think that we found a lot of places where they intersect and they overlap and they can inform each other and they can continue to develop with each other. And I hope that in setting these agendas and whomever is going to be in charge of that and wherever we're going to burn down or start with smaller things, I hope it's those intersections that will keep being emphasized, because I think there's a lot of value there. And we've only seen a few of them in the last 36 hours or whatever, but I think they've been really fruitful. So I also just wanted to extend my thanks to all of the speakers, to everyone that attended, for Sarah and Amy again for helping organize. It's been really great. So thank you all.
I actually want to, there's one final point which is actually on the program on the website as well. So with the state of the conferences, so as you've noted and as you would have seen, this has not been a hybrid conference. That was on purpose because we wanted to have discussion here. We also have no intention in publishing this, at least not ourselves, organizing this, because it's a discussion here that I think is important. So what I do want to urge you, and so that's really going to be the final word, take these discussions with you and have them at your own institutions and get things sort of rippling on from there. So again, thank you very much.